Hey guys, VaulSC here. Hope that you're having a really good week. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to play Infinity the game. If you just stick with me, I'm going to go through enough of the rules for you to be able to participate, to play, enjoy yourself. Now, we're going to cover a lot of material here. If you just remember one thing and take away one thing from this video, please let it be this one thing. You do not need to know all of the rules of Infinity to be able to actually play the game and participate and have a good time. You don't even know half of them. Maybe 20% of the rules will be fine. I've been playing this game for about 6 years, and even I don't know every single little thing there is to know. What happens is when you're in a game and you encounter a situation where you don't know what to do, don't know what the rules, how to apply them, you just look it up in a book or up an app on your cell phone, or just ask your opponent who may be helping you along, and you just continue, and that's literally that easy. So please stick with me. I know it's a long video. Don't be put off by the fact that it's a long video. Don't be put off by the fact that the game seems complicated or the rule book is really long. You will get there. It actually will be pretty easy and straightforward. I know that a lot of you guys watching this video already do play Infinity, and you know everything already, and you're just watching for fun. Guys, please, you probably know that one person who's been thinking about getting into the game and they're on the fence. Do me a favor and share this video with them so that, you can save yourself the time of explaining it to them. Your boy VaulSC coming to back you up and, taking them through it, getting them up to speed with the game. That should be really straightforward if they just watch this. There's also one other thing. You guys might have heard that there is this game called Infinity. In 4th edition, the 4th edition of Infinity, and there's another thing called Code 1. For all intents and purposes, they're basically the same thing. Code 1 is a simpler, more streamlined starter set version of Infinity to help new players get up to speed. But the way I see it, it's a bit like this. If one of your friends says, hey, you should really learn how to get into skateboarding, and your other friend says, go practice skateboarding in your driveway, they're essentially saying the same thing to you. One person is saying, go and learn the skill, and the other person is specifically, telling you to learn the first part of the skill or the easiest way to get into it. Code 1 and Infinity, works the same way. You're going to be learning the same things in the long run either way, so feel free to stick with me through this video. I'll be teaching you things which will apply to both Code 1 and Infinity, so just don't worry too much about the distinction. Alright, so before we get into the actual rules of the game, very big important question to answer for everybody, and that is, why play Infinity in the first place? Why bother? There's other tabletop war games, there's video games. Why would you get into this particular tabletop war game? And I've got 3 reasons why. So reason number 1, the gaming miniatures are insane. They are really, really good. There's a huge variety of factions you can play from. The miniatures themselves are really easy to assemble and put together. They're such a joy to paint. With the factions themselves, you could be playing, as we saw here, evil-looking, high-tech alien race. You could be playing an Oriental sort of style, high-technology infantry faction. You can be playing the sort of power-armored, neo-medieval space knight type guys. They're cyberpunk hacking dudes. You can be playing, your modern-day warfare kind of army men dudes as well. There's a huge variety of choice. You could even play the cyber ninja samurai dudes from the Japanese faction. Look, the miniatures are just out of this world. There are a lot of people who actually just buy them, just paint them, and don't really even play. And if that's your jam, all good. But if you were looking for an excuse to try out a new war game, that is a really good reason why Infinity is really, really hot right now. The other reason, which I think is really relevant to this game, is the terrain that's used for playing, and the scenery and the table layouts that are possible with this game, basically. So if you look at this, this is not like a diorama or something. This is actual practical scenery and terrain that you would actually be able to have a decent game on. And don't get me wrong, you don't have to, do all the hard work to come up with the stuff in order to play. What I'm telling you is that it's possible to really go nuts with the artistic side of this game, and yet it's still practical and meaningful when models are actually getting up on top of terrain and navigating the way around it and everything like that. again, you could easily play just with like hardcover books and paper cups and toy cars on your kitchen table, and you can get away with that. The starter sets that are provided when you get into the game have cut-out paper train, which you can easily assemble to get straight into it. But the point is that, you know, one of the reasons why people stick with this game is because the potential to go nuts with the environments and stuff, it's just insane. It's really, really, really cool. And then the last reason, and probably the most important reason why I think Infinity is just a great game to get into, is that the actual rule system of the game gives you this experience which is very dynamic. It's very exciting. You're spending your resources on your troopers, and they're moving around this wonderful 3D environment, and as soon as they encounter an enemy model, your opponent is getting to make decisions. So you move out and they shoot back at you, or you move out and you dodge this way, or you plant a mine, you do some hacking, and your opponent is responding to that the entire time, and that makes it so that it feels high stakes, it feels action-packed, it feels cinematic and intense. Even though it's your turn and you're the one in charge spending the resources on your stuff to make them do things, there's a chance that your opponent could actually just shoot back and kill your guy. So it always feels very dangerous when you're out there, and that makes this game really fun and exciting, and actually results in a fair bit of tactical and strategic depth as well. So please, stick with me. I know it's going to be a long video. I'll try and make it as entertaining as I can, but if you can get through this whole thing, you'll be ready to say to your friends, hey man, I'm pretty sure I understood that. Let's get some models on the table and we'll give this a go. So here we go. The rulebook has a lot to say about the starting conditions of the game, but here are the main things that you need to know. Both players will show up, have a quick chat about the factions and any mission that's being played, and then each player will roll a single d20, 20-sided dice, and they're comparing the result to a particular target number that they're going for, and if both players fail a roll, as we can see here, you just keep rolling until a winner is determined, and whoever wins this roll can decide whether they want to pick the table side they prefer, or choose to go first and have the first turn, or the second turn if they choose that, and then the other player can simply determine the remaining options that are available. And then you'll simply go to your side of the table that you ended up on, and you'll begin deploying your models. The game itself only goes for 3 turns, which doesn't sound like very much. I have my turn, you have your turn, I have my second turn, you've got your second turn, I play my third turn, you play your third turn, and then the game's over. But so much stuff happens in those turns, as you guys are going to appreciate soon, that a game of Infinity can take an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on you guys. But what we're going to mainly focus on in this video is the basic rules of how to actually play the game and use your models. This is just a simple overview of getting started. Just so you know, there are going to be some links in the video description which I'll be pointing you guys towards throughout the video. One of the first ones is the app which is used either on your cell phone or online, which basically takes you to the rules for the factions and the models themselves. And this is something you're going to be looking at a lot before and after your games, but also during your games to see the rules for the models that are going to be on the field. So as you're watching this video, you might also want to bookmark this or download it on your phone and refer back to it, but we're going to be using this a fair bit, and it's important to note that this is going to be really handy when you're starting in Infinity and, you know, throughout your career as an Infinity player overall. The other thing that's worth noting about the app is that it allows you to work out your army list, and that is the list of miniatures, the soldiers you'll be including in your army for the game, and that number of pieces you'll be using is typically 15. You can take fewer than that, but in the current edition of the game, N4, 15 is the cap, and most people like to take 15 so that they're not outnumbered by the other player. Remember, as with a lot of tabletop war games, if you happen to be the kind of person that owns hundreds of miniatures and your friend only has like 7, it doesn't make sense for you to be allowed to bring all of you guys at once. So there are rules, especially points attributed to the individual models you can take, and there's a limit to the number of points you can spend on them, and that allows us to have a fair game, and the app will allow you to create an army list which you can bring along. But when you're deploying your models, you'll bring out all 15 of your models apart from maybe 1, which is your reserve trooper, and then your opponent will deploy all of their army except for their final reserve trooper model. Then you'll bring in your last trooper out of reserve and place it last, and your opponent will then do the same, and you're ready to get started. So one of the most important and basic things about the Infinity system are the orders. These are the resources that you spend when it's your turn to get your models and your miniatures to do things, to move and attack and make progress and to win the game. At the beginning of your turn, and remember you'll be doing this at the start of each of your turns, but at the beginning of one of your turns, you simply look at how many models you have on the board that are alive, and each of them gets this little green token called a regular order. Now there are also the yellow ones for irregular orders, and there are lieutenant orders, and there are things like that, and impetuous. We're not going to cover that in the scope of this video. We're going to be really basic here. Every model that you have that is alive will get a green regular order token, and it can be spent throughout your turn to make things do stuff, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Remember, later on in the game, if your models have been killed, if they're unconscious, they will not generate a regular order. They just sit there and they don't add to your resources. If your model's been completely removed and it's sitting in your dead pile of guys, then it won't generate any orders either, obviously. So the thing about Infinity is that it gets quicker and quicker as time goes on. Even though your first turn may be very long, your second and third turn might be shorter, and strategically, if you can cripple your opponent and do a lot of damage to them, they can't use their dead models to fuel their counterattack back towards you, which makes the game quite intriguing. So bear that in mind as we start to think about how you can actually spend the orders. Every time that you spend one of your little green regular order tokens, you can activate one of the living models in your army, and you can do something with it. For example, you can make a move somewhere and shoot at something, or duck behind a piece of cover, or activate a piece of equipment. So you spend an order and one of your models moves, and then if you want to, you spend an order and you can choose another model to do something with it. And because you've got one order per living thing in your army, you could make each of them do one thing. Just because you're allowed to spend an order on each different model in your army doesn't mean you have to. If you like, you can spend an order on an individual trooper, make it move and do something, and then spend another one of the orders in your pool of resources to activate that same model again. In fact, there's no limit to the number of times you can do that, except for the overall number of orders that you actually have. So you could spend all of your orders on a single guy if you wanted to. So sometimes we get new players asking us whether it's perhaps too powerful that a model can have all of these resources spent on it and just walk around the table shooting everything with impunity, basically. And Infinity doesn't really quite work like that, and I want to go through a few reasons why. The first reason why is that the guns that you use have strengths and weaknesses. They have ranges, and what may happen is that as you're moving your troop across the battlefield and pumping all of your resources into it, it might encounter a situation where it just wasn't the right tool for the job. It wasn't really the man of the hour, and its gun wasn't really appropriate for a particular enemy that it encountered, and that's one reason why you may have been wanting to spend some of your orders, at least, on other models in your army. Another thing that can go wrong when you spend all of your resources and your orders in one model to run all the way around the battlefield is it may just get too close to the enemy and run into some sort of trap. Maybe they trigger some sort of flamethrower or short-range weapon that you would have been better off just staying away from. So that's another reason why players don't always just run all the way across the table into the middle of the enemy. Thirdly, it can happen that your opponent is able to respond to you. Even though it's your turn, you're moving out, your opponent shoots back at you or attacks back in some fashion, and the model that you were spending the resources on just dies, and inevitably you're going to have to spend your orders on other things. So it's not always a matter of just piling them all into that one miniature. The entire army obviously has an opportunity to partake in the turn, so there's a bit of diversity going on. Coming back to how to spend the actual orders themselves, you take your little green regular order token, you flip it over, and you nominate one of your pieces to activate, and it's allowed to do something. Now, that something that it's allowed to do is either a single long skill, as it's called, or you can do two short skills. So another way to think of it is you can either do one rather strenuous and difficult thing, or you can do two quick things. Let's go through some basic examples of that. So if you spend the order to do a long skill, for example, you might make your model jump, which is where you take your model and it crosses some sort of barrier or distance or gap or cliff or something like that. So you can move your allocated distance 4 inches in a lot of cases and get from one place to another. Or alternatively, another long skill that you can accomplish by spending a normal regular order is to climb. So you start at the top of a building or cliff face, or maybe at the bottom, and you are going in a vertical direction, which is something you normally can't do unless you spend that long skill, for example, where you use up your entire order to do that. But most of the time in Infinity, you actually get to do two things with your order, and the common examples are move and then move again. You guys who may have played other tabletop war games are used to sort of foregoing any kind of attacking or actual action and moving further. Well, Infinity is similar. So you spend your regular order and you move, and then if you want to, you can move again before you need to actually spend that further order on it. Another example is where you'll move and do an action like shooting your gun, firing your weapon, and that's an extremely common thing to do in Infinity. You move and then you target something with your gun because you've moved into line of sight where you can see it. Another example is where you move and you try and dodge. So you've moved somewhere and you are under attack from the enemy because something's going off at you. There's some sort of trap or response from the opponent and you're trying to dodge. And dodging allows you to get a little bit of movement as well, usually 2 inches worth of movement, as opposed to the whatever movement you would otherwise have been allowed, possibly 4 inches or whatever was on your unit profile. We'll come to that later. Another example is where you move and lay down a piece of equipment like a mine. So that is where you move somewhere, or not. You don't really have to move the full allocation. It's up to you, but you're actually placing a new thing on the table by using one of your short skills, part of the overall order you're spending. Another example is where you activate a piece of terrain, or like an objective, like a console. So you move up to the mission objective, and then the second part of your order, that other short skill, is where you actually press a button or do something in the world of the game. So as you can see, when you spend an order, you are either doing one dedicated specific thing, or you are doing two different things. The main restriction you need to know about with splitting into two short skills is that you can only ever do one action in terms of actually shooting or dodging or placing that piece of equipment or interacting with that objective. You can't do that twice, but you can move twice. So bear in mind, if you want to use your two short skills to move a couple of times, you can, but you can't shoot and then shoot again. Every time you want to shoot or dodge or take an action of that kind, you've got to spend an entirely fresh new order. And that's something you want to really take the time to get familiar with and get your head around at the start of learning this game, because it's really, really important. And the rulebook will explain that in more detail. But if you've understood what I've just said, you've already come a long way. I want to pause the tutorial for just a second to remind everybody that it's possible to play Infinity the game on Tabletop Simulator online, as many of us do nowadays, especially in the COVID-19 worldwide environment. Now, I'm not saying that this is a substitute or a replacement completely for Infinity the game, which is a tabletop game which has wonderful miniatures which you're going to want to buy in real life and use with your friends. What I will say, though, is that this is available and is out there. We're not going to tell you how to use Tabletop Simulator in this particular video. There is a link in the video description to my other tutorial video, which you're welcome to watch, and you should watch if you want to play this online. It goes into a lot of detail about how to use it. But the point is here that it's possible to obviously play Infinity on your computer, and more importantly, during this video tutorial about how to play Infinity the game, I will be able to use it to more precisely sort of explain things like line of sight and order flipping and position by using this really wonderful tool visually, which will really help you in your understanding of how to play this game. But up until now, I've been using a lot of footage from real life and images of actual real models, just because I want to make it very clear to everybody that Infinity is a game about real life miniatures which you collect and put on the tabletop. Having said that, from now on in the video, I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff with Tabletop Simulator, showing you how the game works using these wonderful 3D miniatures. So the time's now come to explain to you guys how an automatic reaction order works. It's something which is really fundamental to Infinity because it's all about how you can actually respond even when it's not your turn. Your opponent is spending their orders and resources and you are waiting for them to come and attack you, but as soon as one of their troopers moves in such a way that your friendly soldiers have line of sight to them, or if they come too close to you, you're allowed to make a decision to respond to them, even though it's not your turn yet. And that's what is one of the things that makes Infinity really fun and exciting. So here's basically how it works. Let's pretend that I own this model over here, and I'm the player who's actively got a turn going, and I'm the one spending this regular order on my trooper. So I decide that this is one of the orders in my pool right here, and I flip it over to indicate to my opponent that it's being spent, and I'm nominating this guy because he is under my control and I want to do something with him. As we saw earlier, I can nominate him here and I can do a short skill, and one example of a short skill is to move. And let's just pretend that he decides to move right up to the edge of this truck container here, where he'll have a little bit of cover next to the wall, and he simply stops. Now, after you spend a long skill or a short skill, you must always ask your opponent if they have any responses. You'd usually say to them, hey look dude, have you got any AROs? And ARO stands for automatic reaction order. It's a free thing that they can do in response to what you do when you move one of your troopers. Then your opponent can then decide what he or she would like to do. When you do an ARO, you have a few options. Some very common options are to shoot back. So this model here just fires back with his gun, or maybe tries to dodge back further behind the wall to escape. Or in some exotic scenarios, it might use a piece of equipment or use some special ability that it has. But a lot of the time, the order sequence will really just go like this. I'm spinning the order of my model, I flip it over as you guys can see here, I move with the first thing, my opponent gets a response, most likely the opponent will just shoot back with a gun here, and then I'm eligible to do my second thing, because I have two short skills available to me, as we learned earlier. The most common situation would be for me to simply shoot at my opponent with my second short skill. I could just move back. I'm allowed to do that, but if I did that, I will spend the resources, I've moved out, I get shot, I move back, and my opponent's just shooting me for free, so I wouldn't normally do that. Another option might be that I move out, my opponent then shoots at me, and I try to dodge, maybe because I've just suddenly realized after moving out there that my enemies are a little bit too hot to handle, and I realize I need to sort of actually backtrack a little bit, and I try to dodge for cover back behind this truck here. So that's an example of the structure of this game, where so long as you can really get familiar with this and learn the idea and get your head around how this works, the game starts to get easier and easier. One more time, it's my turn. I control this blue model on the right hand side of your screen. I used one of my regular order tokens. Maybe I've got many of these, like if we look over here, maybe I've got lots of these sitting around, and I just spend one of them, and that allows me to commit some sort of action to this guy. He moves up to the position where he can actually see this enemy model. The player in control of this model says, aha, I'm going to fire my gun at you. And then I go, aha, I'm going to use the remainder of my order, the second short skill that is, to fire back at you, and then we'll roll some dice to resolve the conflict in the battle and see who takes damage and who doesn't. And that's generally how the basic structure of an order works in Infinity. Everybody who's following this so far is doing really, really well. Just stick with me. The game honestly doesn't get much more complicated than what we're currently talking about, and as you can see, it's kind of straightforward if you just break it down. I'm going to give you some more examples of how this interaction works, where you spend your regular order, your model does something, the enemy can respond, and then you can do another thing. Now, as we talked about, the situation where the enemy gets to do something, that's this player over here, that occurs when you come into line of sight, when you give them an opportunity to respond to you because they can see you. So for example, if this winged Kodali miniature over here spends the regular order and just simply moves a little bit over here, she can't see anybody right now. This enemy over here is just completely blocked by this piece of terrain, so he won't even get a response. Now, one exception to that is if she activates and comes a little bit too close to him. So I spend this, and she's just moving up near the wall. Our opponent here can respond to her if she comes too close. And the way that we determine that is by something called zone of control. Zone of control means anything within 8 inches of that model. And as we can see here, she's only 6 inches away through the wall. But anytime somebody activates nearby, so if we just measure this in this sort of radius of around about 8 inches, they get to respond as well if you've come too close to them. Imagine it like she's trying to creep up on him, but he can hear her footsteps and he gets to respond. He can't respond by shooting, because you need to be able to see in any model to be able to shoot it. But there may be other things that he can do. For example, he might be able to dodge. So if she activates and moves a little bit too close to him, we check the range, it's within 8 inches, he's deciding to dodge, and that might allow him to roll a dice. And if he passes his check, he might be able to dodge a little bit further away. And as she's chasing him with new orders to catch him, he's slowly adjusting his position, and that keeps the game kind of fun and exciting and dynamic as you are closing in on your prey, so to speak, to shoot them and kill them. Another thing I want to teach you guys about is how you determine where the shots actually take effect from. So in our other example where Kodali here, our winged alien friend, has a regular order spent on her, and say she just moves up here. Remember, you don't have to use the full 4 inches that you're allocated. You could simply move 1.5 or 2 or 0 if you want to, but she's moved in such a way that she can see our opponent in the distance, and the opponent can shoot the weapon back at her. I want you guys to understand this. When it's your turn, and you spend the order on your model, and you can currently see the enemy model, if you move away from them so that you end the movement in a position where you can't see each other, they can still choose to shoot you at the point you started at, because they can nominate any point in your movement to take that particular shot. And same goes for you shooting back at them. So in this situation, she starts here, we spin the order on her, she moves over here, that's the first short skill. The opponent in the distance can choose an ARO, automatic reaction order, and shoot back at her from the point where she started, or any other point that he could see her. And she can shoot at him from any point that she started from way back here. And that's how you'd work it out. For those of you who play a game like 40k, for example, I don't know if they've changed a lot of things with the mechanics, but presumably you move all your models first, and then there's a specific period of time where you shoot them, and it's only from that point. When I used to play War Machine and Hordes, for example, you only were able to shoot before moving if you had a special ability, for example. In this game, it's different. You work out the trajectory and the path of your movement, and you can do your action at any point during that movement. The same goes for, laying a piece of equipment on the ground or interacting with an objective. You can do it at any point in your move. To look at another example, let's imagine she starts here, and she spends her little thing, and she decides to move part of her movement out here, that's 2 inches, and then decides to use the other half of it to come back. Because remember, you don't have to go in a straight line, you can zigzag if you want. So you could move 2 inches that way and 2 inches this way. You can come in an L shape around the terrain. It can be split up in any way you like. But if she starts here, we spend the order on her, and she comes out a couple of inches and then comes back, that's a legal move. And your opponent has to respond because he could see you at partway through that movement. So this guy here just opts to shoot back, and our alien winged friend here shoots from this point halfway through her order, if you guys understand that. Another example is, let's say she starts here, she has had the resources spent on her to do something, and she simply decides to move all the way over to here with her full 4 inches of move and finishes there. Well, she started at a point where she couldn't see him, and she ended at a point where she couldn't see him, but he could see her halfway through there, so our opponent's going to nominate this spot in the middle to take the shot from, and she will simply shoot back at him from this spot. If she chooses to shoot at all, she might not end up doing that. So hopefully that makes sense. Pretty straightforward once you get your head around it. So you guys are obviously really keen to understand how to actually resolve the action. What do you do to determine which person lives and which person dies when there is a shootout? And that's what we're going to be covering next. So let's pretend that the guy on the right over here is our active model, And no, let's do it the other way around. We've got the blue arrow. So we're going to pretend that this person here is the active model, and we're spending an order on this person here. And it's going to simply move 4 inches in this direction until it hits this exact point. And we notice that there is a clear line of fire through this doorway where there wasn't over here. So we've moved into a position where we can see the enemy. We ask our opponent if he or she has any AROs. So this player decides, what shall I do? Well, I've got a rifle. I'm going to open fire with my rifle. I'm going to shoot you, which allows us a second short skill option over here. We could keep moving, we could dodge, but clearly we all want to fire back, and there is now going to be a shootout. What this really represents is the model walking around the real world, possibly unaware of where his opponent is, and suddenly realizing, oh my gosh, I need to kill this person, and they're opening fire with their gun immediately. And it's really up to the initiative and the quickness of the soldier here in question, who swings their gun around first and aims well enough to incapacitate their opponent. And the dice basically is going to be used to determine that. And the way that we do this is we look up the stats that the models actually have in the app or in the rules or on the online website which does this. And what we're going to be looking for is their ballistic skill value. And we're going to be talking about the stats a little bit more later, but suffice to say that this guy here has a ballistic skill of 12, and this guy has a ballistic skill of 11. And what we're going to be doing in a moment is each guy will roll a dice here, and they will try to get equal to or lower than the target number, the number written on their profile that indicates how good they are at shooting. So the higher the number is, the better it is, because if your ballistic skill or your ability with firing a gun is 20, it means that no matter what you roll on your dice, you're always going to hit the enemy. Whereas if your ballistic skill was 3, it would mean that if you roll higher than a 3 on a 20-sided dice, you will miss, and there's only like a 15% chance of rolling a 3, 2, or a 1 to hit. And that's really what's going to determine this. So if we have our dice over here and we roll it, there's a better way of doing it on Tabletop Simulator. You simply bring it over here and just hit the R button and it will roll for you. So at 10, that's a hit. And this guy over here, we roll it, and what do we get? It was going to be a 20, it's a 4, so that is also a hit. So then we compare the numbers, and whoever's got the highest number will actually win and cause damage to their opponent. But let's just go through the possibilities. If one person rolls a hit, meaning they get equal to or less than the number they needed, in this case a 12 for this person or an 11 for this person, that's all good, happy days. And if the other person misses, then you're going to cause damage to them. If you both miss, nothing happens, and the shots go wide and they continue firing at each other as you spend more orders and continue the turn. If they both hit, like we've just seen here, we compare the dice roll, and whoever rolled highest wins and negates the hit of their opponent, right? So it's about rolling as high as possible towards the desired number of a 12 in this case, or an 11 in this case, but not going over that result. So I'm going to take these two dice here, and I'm just going to take you guys through some examples. I'll select both dice and I'll roll them. So 13, that's a miss, and a 20, that's a miss. That would mean that nothing happens, and the order that we spent on this chap here is basically wasted. He's managed to move over here and not really shoot anything, and nothing's really happened. Let's roll the dice again. So now we've got a 15, that's a miss, and this is an 8. Unluckily, this guy has actually seen us coming and shot us a little bit too quickly, and this model will now be called on to take some damage. Let's try it again. So 15, that's a miss, 19, a miss. Again, nothing's happened. So you can kind of see how this works. If they both roll the exact same number, like they both get a 4, again, nothing happens, neither of them actually won. If this guy rolls a 12, and this guy also rolls a 12, well, that means this guy wins because he needed a 12, and this guy needed an 11 or less, which is technically a miss. So we'll talk a little bit more about critical hits and what happens when you roll exactly the number you need. That's coming up later in the video. But for now, I just want you guys to understand that it's all about trying to roll as high as possible when you're shooting your opponent, but not going over the desired number that you need. Meaning that the higher the number is that you're trying to target, the better it is for you, which means that troopers who have a higher value listed on their profile have a better chance of hitting their opponents and, you know, more skilled with guns and more valuable to you on the battlefield. And the numbers will change, and there are different factors that will affect them, and we'll talk about that soon. But for now, I just, guys, want you to understand this. Lastly, I'm not too sure if you guys know how to play the game blackjack, but that's quite a good analogy. When you're playing blackjack, for example, with your friends or at a casino, you're being dealt cards, and you're adding up the numbers on the cards. You get dealt a 3, then you get dealt a 6, you then have a 9, you get dealt a 5, you have a 14 now, and you're trying to get as high as possible towards the number 21 to win at blackjack. But if you go over, you bust, and if you bet money, you lose that money. But you're up against the dealer. So if you manage to get an 18, and you're up against the dealer, and the dealer gets to a 17 and they have to stand on a 17, you will actually win. You'll come up better off. But if you stopped, if you stood and you didn't want to hit for any more cards when you're on a 13 and the dealer gets a 17, you lose your money because they came in at 21 or under, but they came in higher than you did. And that's what we're trying to go for here with this example of the face-to-face rolls in Infinity. And that's what this is. It's a face-to-face roll where you both roll and you're affecting each other with the outcome of your dice, and it's a face-off to see who comes out better off. And again, we're going to go through some more examples throughout the video. We'll give you more chance to understand this, but once you get your head around how face-to-face rolls works, you're pretty much halfway there. As you guys have learned, face-to-face rolls happen when two models come into line of sight of each other, or maybe if they come very close to each other, but it's usually when they come into line of sight of each other, and then the action happens, the bullets start flying. But tabletop war games are very spatial, they're very tactile, they're three-dimensional, and sometimes the players might be wondering whether they have achieved line of sight. You've moved your model. Can model A actually see model B? Can you draw a line between the two miniatures and determine that it's time to roll the dice? And other wargaming systems have got different ways of doing this. There might just be a simple scale where, you know, you see over some kinds of terrain but not other kinds of terrain. You might use a true line of sight where even if the model's got a big long arm or a flag or something, that you can see it as long as you get down to eye level like this and actually look. But Infinity uses a system that I quite like, and that is the silhouette system, where when you're trying to determine whether these guys can actually see each other, you have something called a silhouette, which is a little marker you put down to replace your model, and it's different depending on what type of model it is. And that way you get a much clearer way of determining whether, you know, line of sight does in fact exist between the two miniatures. And there are little tokens and different tools that you can buy to assist you with this, but Tabletop Simulator shows this quite well, because if we look at this model over here, which has a long-barreled gun and a cape, and it's up on top of this building, realistically what we're playing with here is a cylinder that looks like that. And if you're playing this game in person, obviously, you can put a little, rectangular bit of cardboard behind this model that sort of represents the width and the height of the cylinder, and then that allows you to check. Now, this sniper over here has a silhouette 2. That's basically a second level silhouette in terms of the type of size that it is. And this big fighting robot over here has a silhouette 7. And as you can see here, when we replace the model with the cylinder doesn't quite get to the top of its backpack, and obviously doesn't represent the gun sticking out the side, because that part of it's cosmetic. This allows you to much more precisely move around the battlefield and know at all times, whether or not you've exposed yourself to the enemy in terms of where your guy actually is, how much space he occupies, and what the enemy will need to do to get into line of sight and force that face-to-face roll to happen. After all, you may start to get familiar with this game and realize that maybe there'll be a guy with a big machine gun that's very powerful that you need to avoid, and you don't want to get into a situation where you're rolling dice because that model has a much greater chance of blowing you away. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're trying to hunt them down and you've got a very powerful weapon. It's your active turn and you know what you're doing and you're trying to get line of sight to them to achieve that. Well, Infinity does that by using these, and at any time you can ask your opponent to replace their model with this silhouette token marker, and you can do the same, and you can always ascertain whether two models can see each other, which is really, really important. We're going to be talking about cover soon as well, which is where your model's actually touching something that obscures the two silhouettes, where when you're drawing line of sight, this wall is actually in between the two models. We'll talk about that a bit more soon. And also when you're going prone, that's when you drop to the ground and you're not taking up the full silhouette. You're more like a little marker which is flat on the ground. But it's important for you guys just really know what these silhouettes are. They can be found on the stats of the profile, which we will talk about a little bit later. But this is a really good way of nicely and cleanly determining how line of sight is achieved or avoided in this game, which is a very positional game and very much about outmaneuvering your opponent and hunting them down when they're weak and avoiding them when they are strong. I want to take the time to start going over some of the stats that appear on your model profile that you'll be referring to while you're playing. And we've already covered some of them off, but let's go through this in a comprehensive way. So here you can see the name of your unit, and that's where you'll find it. But this row of numbers here are the stat line of the model. Movement is something we already talked about. So the 4-4 stands for how fast the model can move for every short skill that it does. So you spend the order, it can move 4 inches. If you choose to move again in that same order, it can move another 4 inches. Sometimes you'll see 6-2 written on that part of the profile, or 8-4, or something weird like that. What it's referring to is how fast you move on the first short skill, and then only if you spend a secondary short skill in that same order do you use the secondary value, and it sometimes might be different. Let's say you do have a heavy infantry model that has 6 for the first value and 2 for the second value. It means you spend the order, it can move 6 inches, and then if you spend the second order, it can only go 2 inches, meaning that it goes the same distance as something with a 4-4 move. But the difference to appreciate here is that a lot of the time you move and then you complete some sort of action like shooting. So if model A moves 4 inches and shoots, and then moves 4 inches and shoots, and moves 4 inches and shoots with 3 different orders, but model B moves 6 inches and shoots, 6 inches and shoots, 6 inches and shoots with 3 orders, you're getting a lot further, and that's where the difference can be made. The next stat is close combat. CC stands for close combat. And this is something which, as you can imagine, happens when you get up close to the enemy and you're trying to knife them to death or swipe them with a sword or do something very, very close ranged. And it is used when a model moves and reaches base contact with an enemy. And once it reaches base contact, it counts as being engaged. And it can't actually leave that combat unless it kills the enemy that it's fighting up close with or dodges out of there somehow. Once you're in close combat, you can't shoot out at enemy models elsewhere on the table. And if you shoot into a close combat, like you fire at your friend who's fighting somebody else off in the distance, there's a chance you might miss and hit your friend by mistake. There are rules that determine how that works. But what you need to know is that CC is really for just when you get in base contact with your enemy. Remembering from what we learned earlier, where if you move, the enemy can take a shot at you at any point in your movement. So if you spend the order, short skill to move, you go into close combat, the enemy can fire at you as you're approaching. They can pick a point in your trajectory of approach where they can shoot you, and you can shoot them as you're moving into close combat, or either of you at that point can choose the point where you reach base contact and make a close combat attack. In fact, one person might make a swing with their sword at the same time the other person fires their gun. But if one or both players, well, I should say if both players survive that kind of encounter and are still locked in deadly close combat, that mortal combat, so to speak, then you're spinning a new order on your model who is locked in, engaged with the enemy, and you can only make close combat attacks or attempt to dodge from that point. Another quick note is that you'll sometimes see models that have a close combat stat that's higher than 20. And because you're rolling a 20-sided dice, it's not possible to roll a 21 or a 22 or a 23. But if you ever see that listed on your profile, it means that that model gets to add 1 to whatever the dice roll is for every point above 20. So if your model has a CC stat of 23, then you're adding 3 to whatever number you're trying to get. So if I roll a 7 and I'm CC 23, it counts as a 10. If I roll a 13, it counts as a 16. The game rewards you for getting the exact number you need, so normally if you are CC 14, like this guy is, if you roll exactly a 14, it's a critical hit, it causes extra damage. If your CC is 23, that means you can get a critical hit on a 17, 18, or 19, or a 20, because any of those numbers basically just get shunted up and added to the total, and the maximum cap is 20, so it's much more likely to cause that critical hit, causing extra damage if your CC stat is above 20. Cool, hopefully that made sense. Now, ballistic skill we have already talked about, so we can pretty much skip over that. You guys kind of understand how that works from our earlier description. Physical is the next one. PH stands for physical, and that is, it's about a model's strength and their agility and their ability to move around, and it's used for a couple of things. One of those things is dodging. So we talked earlier how if somebody shoots you, you can react by dodging, or if you want to just move and then dodge for whatever reason, you are making a dice roll that may pass or fail, and the number that you need to succeed is the physical stat or less. So this particular trooper we're looking at on screen must roll a 10 or lower to succeed. Bear in mind that if it's a face-to-face roll where you're encountering an enemy, you can see them, and one player's dodging, one player's shooting, and if they're encountering each other and the shooting model is firing at the model dodging, again, the dice rolls are compared in the same way that they are when you shoot. The dodge has to actually beat the shot in order for you to actually move and get the movement. Otherwise, you're struck and you take damage, if that makes sense. So it is a comparative face-to-face roll thing at the end of the day. Sometimes what may happen is that there's several models involved. So Model A is the friendly Kappa unit we're talking about, and that moves out, and then there are two enemies in the distance that both get an automatic reaction order, and they can both respond. One of them shoots back at you, and the other one dodges. You can pick which one of them to have that encounter with, and possibly even pick both of them. But let's say you only direct your attention to the model shooting back at you, as you normally would, and there's another model off in the distance dodging. They can just get a roll for free, and if they get a 10 or less, they pass. They don't have to beat your dice roll with their dice roll, if you guys remember how the face-to-face rolls work. Don't worry if you don't understand that completely, just get the basic idea and you're fine. So the next one we'll talk about here is willpower. WIP stands for willpower, and this one's a little bit more abstract. Willpower seems to combine a few different traits and characteristics. It's about intelligence, and it's about motivation, and it's about certain kinds of skills. Willpower is used, for example, at the start of the game when you're both making a dice roll to determine who begins, who can choose the first turn or second turn or pick which table side they're on. The players are actually using the willpower value of their lieutenant, the leader of their army. So if you include a lieutenant who has very high willpower, you have a better chance of winning that roll. It's also used for capturing objectives where you move up to some sort of terminal or console or switch you've got to flip, and there's some sort of skill involved there. You must use your willpower value to succeed by rolling equal to or lower than your willpower. It's used for hacking programs and cyber warfare and things like that. It's used for your ability to discover camouflaged troopers where you're trying to locate a disguised enemy model on the battlefield. So that general kind of thing is where willpower comes into play. Armor is the next one, and very soon we'll do a section a little bit more about taking damage and armor saves in general. But the idea here that you need to remember is that the higher the value of your armor, the tougher you are, and the more likely you are to withstand damage, because when you make a dice roll to determine whether you actually die when you take damage, you get to add the amount of armor you have. And if you have armor 1, well, you get to add +1 to your dice roll. If you have armor 10, you get to add 10 to your dice roll, and it significantly affects how likely you are to shrug off that shot and survive. The next one is BTS, which stands for Biotechnological Shield, and it's a bit more of a weird one. It is very similar to armor, though. Some types of weapons affect you in exotic kinds of ways, and other types of weapons are just a plain old bullet to the chest, and that's where armor will help. BTS is more your cybersecurity, protecting you against hacking, interfering with your electronics, or some sort of electromagnetic grenade going off nearby to you, or some weird nanopulsar, nanobots being injected into your system somehow from some weird weapon, or some sort of alien plasma explosive going off nearby. Just bear in mind that there are some attacks which cause a certain kind of damage and can only be saved by making a BTS roll. And instead of adding your armor value, you'd be adding your BTS value, and this particular trooper doesn't have any, so won't gain any additional protection, but still may be able to save naturally, just because at the end of the day, you're rolling a dice and just trying to exceed a certain value, and as we'll talk about later, it will be the value of the weapons damage. So that's how that works. If you do take damage in this game, and we will cover this soon, you lose a point from your wounds characteristic stat thing here. So that's over here. Wounds 1 means that as soon as you fail one armor save and you've taken 1 point of damage, you go unconscious. So you get an unconscious marker shoved next to you, and you are down, and that means the model can't have any more orders spent on it, and the only way to get that model back onto the table is by repairing it or reviving it with a doctor or whatever you need to do to get it back. If it takes any additional wounds, it goes from 0 wounds to -0, and we remove it from the table, and there is never any bringing that model back ever. So that's how that works. Some models are very big and tough, and they have a wounds value which is higher than 1, meaning that they can take additional punishment and damage, and you'll need to cause them to fail a lot more armor saves before they become incapacitated. S at the end here, that refers to the silhouette value, and we just had a section talking about that where that sniper on the building had a silhouette value of 2, meaning that if you want to see how much space it takes up on the battlefield physically, you will have a look at that. If it says silhouette 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, it's a different cylinder volume. Then lastly, AVA refers simply to how many of these models you can have in terms of duplicates of that model that you can have in your army list. So AVA total means that you can take as many Kappa soldiers as you want, but some models are a bit rarer than that. You can only have maybe 2 or 3 of them in your army list, or they're a special character where you can really only have 1 of that person in your team. And that's really just for the list building. So that's the stats. If you're wondering what these numbers mean, now you know. I bet you guys are watching this and starting to wonder what you actually do during the game to get a big advantage over your opponent and actually beat them decisively. Because so far we've really talked about models having 1 dice each and having similar kinds of stats and having similar options in the game. What is it that causes you to actually get the jump on your opponent and really get a big advantage over them? And that's the time for us to talk about mods, the things in the game that give you a better chance of succeeding or a worse chance of succeeding, or allow you to roll more dice and things like that. We're going to take the time to go over it because it's really, really important. Yes, this is a game where luck plays a significant factor, but skill plays a significant factor as well. And if you're able to outmaneuver your opponent, if you're able to do the damage when, things are going your way and maximize your strengths and strike while the iron's hot, you may find yourself getting into situations where you just have a drastic advantage, and we'll talk about that right now. So, we know how a face-to-face roll works. Let's say it's the turn of the player on the left with the orange Yu Ching model here, and this model has moved just behind the wall a little bit, and we have a response from our opponent over here with this model wanting to shoot back at us. So we declare a shot with our second shot skill using this model. When it's your turn, and when it's you who is spending the spending the orders to attack, you don't just get to roll 1 dice. You get to roll as many dice as are mentioned on the profile for, not your trooper that we just talked about, but the profile for your weapon. So that's right. The miniature itself has all those stats that we just talked about, BS, CC, willpower, physical, but a gun also has some stats as well. And what you do is you look at your gun and you see what its burst value is. We've got B for burst, and you get to roll the number of dice shown there. So in this particular case, this guy actually gets to roll 3 dice, and our opponent gets to roll 1. So even if ballistic skill was equal, and in this case it's not, but let's pretend we've both got a ballistic skill of 10, I've got 3 opportunities to roll, and this person only has 1. So every time this happens, I have a greater chance of getting, a high dice roll that's close to my number, and if one of them misses, that's okay. But also if my opponent misses, like we've seen here, all of these will actually hit. So in this particular case, this icon here represents a 1. I've got a 1 here, a 4 here, and a 4. Those all come under my target required number, and this person's just flat out missed. So this model here actually has to take 3 armor saves, and for every failed save, that's a point of damage. So that's something which we're going to be getting into a little bit more, and that you guys can sort of look up in your own time. Is that when it's your turn, you're really got a big advantage, and your opponent should be running and hiding from you. It's not really a matter of, oh, it's just going to be a coin flip every time I attack an enemy model. If you're doing this correctly, and you're attacking with your powerful models, and you're catching enemy models out in the open or somewhere where you can get to them, then you have a massive, massive advantage. Just with dice rolls again, your opponent can still negate some of your lower rolls here. So this is a good example. We've got a 9 over here, and that beats the 8 and beats the 7, but we've got an 11. So only the 11 hits. These 2 dice are actually taken away, and the 11 then beats the 9, and this model takes 1 hit. So this is something we're going to need to start talking about with face-to-face rolls again. I'll do another example. So what you're doing is you're first of all working out if anybody has missed any of their shots, and we simply remove those dice rolls. Again, if we needed 10s, this one is removed, this one hits. The 5 hits and the 4 hits, but then we remove any dice that have been, defeated by our opponent, so to speak. So a 5, that's higher than the 4 that we've got over here. So the 4 actually doesn't connect. The 10 is higher than the 5, so the 5 doesn't connect, and we're just left with this, and that means our opponent just takes 1 hit. So the way to cause more than one hit, or more than one point of damage, is really to have multiple dice that beat your opponent. So if the opponent misses, that's great, good way of doing it. If they just roll a 1, and I've rolled a 2, 3, and a 4, then they are taking 3 armor saves, so a fair bit of damage. So as you're looking through the game at the profiles of the troopers, you should also be considering what guns they have, and what the profiles of the guns are. So just a quick few examples. If you have a missile launcher, you only ever get to roll 1 dice. It's firing 1 big missile at a time. A sniper rifle or a shotgun fires 2 dice when it's your active turn. A combi rifle fires 3. Heavy machine gun, that fires with 4 dice. A hyper rapid magnetic cannon has 5 dice. But the thing I want you guys just to remember is that when it's your reactive turn, even though you may have one of these guns, and you might have a machine gun or something when you're the one responding, you always only get to roll 1 dice when you are declaring an ARO and when you're defending and counterattacking like that. Only 1 dice for the defender, but as many dice as are listed on the profile for the person attacking. And once you're starting to understand that, you're really getting into what it means to play Infinity, because you get to be the person moving around and finding your opponents and just blasting them with additional dice rolls, and your opponent has to run and hide, which is why if you want to win a lot of games with Infinity, it's a good tactic to be able to hide your troopers and defend well and deploy them correctly and keep them behind bits of cover, and don't let your opponent see them until it's your turn to move out and hunt down their troopers. We're currently having a conversation about modifiers, and we just had a look at how you can modify the number of dice that you get to roll, but modifiers is a bigger category than that. We talked earlier about how you need a specific number when you're trying to hit your opponent, and you look at the ballistic skill. So this model here happens to have a ballistic skill of 13. By the way, to experienced players who are watching this tutorial so far, you're probably cringing when I'm talking about Miyamoto Musashi trying to dodge out of the way and failing on a 13 when in fact he probably would have passed. And then in my last example, your Dao Fei needing a 10 to hit when he needs a 13 to hit, and then me rolling an 11 calling that a miss anyway. Everybody needs to chill, just ignore that, and we are going to talk about an example here where we have, if we zoom out and then zoom back in again, we have the veteran Kazakh, who is ballistic skill 13. So when he tries to hit this alien Nox trooper guy in the distance, the Nox Trooper is going to fire back with ballistic skill 11. So we talked about an example where this guy needs 13 and this guy needs 11. But it's a bit more complex than that. If this is our active turn, we spend the order, we might move somewhere, and our opponent can respond because they get an ARO, we move into line of sight, and then we shoot. This is an HMG, so we get to roll 4 dice. But weapons have ranges, and ranges are very important in this game, just like ballistic skill and just like the number of dice that you roll. When it's time to do the dice roll and the face-to-face roll, we measure with our tape measure or our in-game tool here, and we see that the range is 11.3 inches. Every gun has a set of statistics based on how good it is at various kinds of ranges. We call them range bands because up to a certain point, for example, this guy up to 8 inches, he actually gets a negative modifier, meaning it's a little bit harder for him to hit anything right in front of him as he tries to swing around his massive machine gun and blast them. So if this guy was actually up here and we do the order and we get to the point where we roll the dice, I've got 4 dice, but all of my shots suffer a penalty because he is less than 8 inches away, and that penalty for this guy is -3. So when I actually calculate what I need to roll, I'll take my ballistic skill of 13 and I'll subtract 3 and it will give me 10. So in fact, I'm trying to roll 10s on my 4 dice that I get to roll, rather than 13s. Whereas this guy has a combi rifle, which actually gets a bonus at that range. It's actually +3 to hit at anything within 16 inches. So this guy is fine way out to this sort of range here. It goes quite a way. 16 inches is all the way to there, and anything in that sort of radius, he'll get a bonus. So in this particular example, if this veteran Kazakh with HMG uses his ballistic skill of 13, but at very short range, he'll need 10s to hit. Whereas this Nock Trooper would have otherwise needed 11s, but he gets +3 because of the close range of his combi rifle. He will need 14 to hit. And he'll only be on 1 dice because he's reacting. But if this was the enemy turn and he's the one moving, this guy gets to roll 3 dice for his combi rifle. He gets add +3 for having a close range band on his combi rifle. So that'll be 3 dice being rolled, needing 14s on each of those dice, or less to score hits. Whereas this guy would respond, and again needing 10s, and only 1 dice if he's the one reacting. Let's look at another example. Let's say we catch him at a really good range for the HMG, which is way back here. So let's say this guy is way back here. So we'll get out our measuring tool, and this time we'll have a look, and we'll say that we've moved around just to here. Just so I don't bump into my colliders, I'm just going to move this guy like that. And this model declares a response. He's going to shoot long range with his gun. And then we measure it, and we see that the distance is actually 20. And that's a positive thing for the heavy machine gun, because a heavy machine gun has a positive +3 range band if it's shooting at something between 16 inches and 32 inches away. So having a look at that, all the way out to 16 inches, he's not getting the bonus. So to be exact, if we're going to be realistic about this, out to 8 inches here, so I'll bring him back into the frame. So out to 8 inches here, he's getting a penalty of -3. Anything between that point here and 32 inches away, he is going to be at a 0 range. Sorry, anything between 8 inches and 16 inches, I should say. So from there out to around about here, those 2 points, he's going to get no penalty or modifier at all, and he will just need 13. And this is a bit easier if you actually look at the chart. But anything that's beyond 16 inches, he actually is going to be enjoying a positive benefit of +3. So his ballistic skill of 13 will go up to 16. So he's going to need 4. He's going to have 4 dice to roll, and he will need 16 or less on each dice, whereas this guy, with his combi rifle, the range drops off. Once it's beyond 16, he actually gets a penalty of -3. So our enemy is going to be dropping down to needing an 8 instead of an 11 on the dice. And even the HMG, very long range, once it gets beyond 32, like something all the way over here, it's going to be, unfortunately, getting another penalty again. And it's only the sniper rifles and missile launchers that get a positive bonus to things that are really far off in the distance. So take a little bit of time to read through some of the weapon charts and stats and understand that. Maybe play around with your own models on the battlefield and just get a visual and spatial sort of feel for how this affects things, because this is what makes the game very decisive. If you use your long-range guns to shoot enemies in the distance and your short-range guns to shoot them up close, if you've got shotguns and flamethrowers and things, these get better and better at close range. And once you get familiar with the modifiers and those kinds of things, you're ready to start playing Infinity really well and getting really good advantages over your opponent. Now you guys obviously understand how the weapon that you're using affects how many dice you get to roll when it's your turn, and the range of the gun will affect the number that you're trying to get when you're making the rolls. But there are some other modifiers as well, and I want to go over them quickly. Let's have a look at this battlefield here, and we notice that nearby there is a forest. Sometimes you'll play on a table where the players will agree that if one model is inside the forest somehow, in Tabletop Simulator we usually mark it out with the side of the forest being marked by that little texture. So if you're touching it, then a model shooting at you is at a penalty, usually -3 as an example. Also, some models themselves might actually have their own abilities which affect what you need to hit. For example, Uma Sorensen, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name correctly, but she has mimetism -3, which means that unless you have a piece of equipment to ignore that, then this guy over here is going to be suffering a -3 penalty when he shoots at her, for example. I also have a little smoke template over here. There are some troopers in the game that can fire a grenade that causes a smoke cloud, and if you're shooting through it, there can sometimes be penalties relating to that as well that affect what you need to hit. But by far, the main one that we want to focus on right now is cover, because I haven't really fully explained it in this video so far. Cover works like this. When you're generating line of sight, or at least determining line of sight between the two models, you're using the silhouette like we talked about before. So if at any point of your silhouette you can see some point from the other person's silhouette, you've got line of fire and the face-to-face can happen and bullets start flying. Now, if part of your silhouette is obscured by cover, a piece of terrain for example, and if you are touching that piece of terrain, then cover applies. And I will want to look at some examples of that. So in this particular case, a small piece of this model's base is being obscured. And look, it doesn't really matter which part of this model's silhouette you use, even in the extreme top right-hand side, there's still going to be that small point there where her base is obscured. So she counts as being in cover, but she must touch it. If she is in fact over here, no cover at all. Even though the silhouette's obscured, she's not touching this group of black barrels. Similarly, this guy right here, he's actually not in cover. If we put her up here and we do the opposite and we look from this point of the blue model space here, and we can see the entire thing, this guy is not in cover. But if he comes back around here, if we put him behind this wall, then he does gain that. Cover is really important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it applies a -3 mod to your face-to-face roll when you're shooting at somebody. So in an example like this, the Soyat, who does not have cover right now against Uma, the Soyat is going to be applying whatever mods from his gun. So any bonuses from his gun apply here, or penalties, and then top of that you stack the cover. So if he's got a heavy machine gun that's -3 at this range, he'll actually be at -6 because of the barrels, and then of course another -3 because of Uma's special ability, which makes her even harder to hit. So his ballistic skill of 13 will come all the way down to 4, and as you guys can appreciate, rolling a 4 or less on a 20-sided dice is not that easy. It's a 20% chance, 1 in 5 chance to hit. So that's not great. Uma, on the other hand, she's got some submachine guns or a breaker rifle or something that's +3 to hit at short range. Her ballistic skill is 13, so it goes up to a 16, and the Soyat here is not getting any penalties applied to her. He does not have that mimetism ability. He's at a range band that's good for her guns, and he's not behind any cover. So the advantage really goes to our blue friend over here, Uma. Hopefully you guys understand that. Now, the thing about cover, which is also really important, and it's just important to bear this in mind at all times, it also applies a mod to the armor save or BTS save that you're going to be taking, and we haven't really covered armor and BTS yet. I'm about to talk to you about that. The short version is that you have to try and roll a dice and roll higher than the damage value of your enemy's gun, and you can add your armor value and +3 from the cover. That's the long story short. We'll cover that in a moment with some examples. But the main thing I want you guys to bear in mind is that cover modifies the dice roll to hit when you're working up the face-to-face roll, and it affects how tough you are at blocking the damage with your armor. So it's doubly important. I know that this is a rules tutorial about what to do and how to play, but I want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up and a tip about really, what you actually should be doing, your strategy on the battlefield. And you should always be very careful and pedantic about cover. You're always looking at moving your model to touch things. You're able to stay in contact with cover as you're moving. You can tell your opponent, I'm staying in cover with this thing and I'm moving just up to here, then I'm moving back a little bit. And if you can ever avoid it, just stay, as long as you can't avoid it, just stay in cover. Sometimes you do need to cross over it and it can't be avoided like this from here to here, but stay in cover as much as you possibly can. It's known as partial cover when you can see part of the silhouette, and total cover when you come back here and the enemy can't see you at all. So that is something you might encounter in the wording of the rules. But cover is such an important concept in this game because that -3 to hit and that +3 on the armor save is just absolutely crucial. Microsoft Paint. So you know that the tutorial is getting really sophisticated when you see the old MS cranked out, but honestly this is really the most straightforward way to express my thoughts on this next bit of the tutorial. And we're going to talk about how critical hits work, because they're going to come up a lot and you need to understand them, but I've left them until now because I want you to understand things like face-to-face rolls and modifiers first, and then understand armor saves right after we talk about this. So here's what I want to express and communicate to you. So far we know that when you are rolling your dice to attack the opponent, and say it's your current turn, you may need a specific number, and let's pretend that number is an 11. Because maybe you have a humble guy who is ballistic skill 11, and your opponent is within a really good range for your gun. So maybe you've got a combi rifle and they're 12 inches away, and anything between 0 and 16 inches gives you a +3 mod, so you'd go up to 14, but then they're behind cover, so they'd come back to 11 again. So see that? You start at 11 because that's your ballistic skill, +3 because they are close by with the gun's correct range band, but -3 again because the cover that they're in, they're behind a set of walls or containers or barrels, brings it back to 11. Our opponent is shooting back at us, and unfortunately they've caught us outside of cover, so our opponent starts at ballistic skill 13, and the range band of the gun's good for them, and there are no other mods, so we're going to say that they need a 16 to hit. So it's us attacking. I'm going to put an A here for active or attacking, and opponent I'm going to put D for defending, just to say it's their reactive turn. And let's see what happens when we roll some dice. You guys know already that if I roll a 1, that's a hit, and if I roll a 4, that's another hit, and if I roll a 17, that's a miss, right? So you guys know that. And my opponent is really just trying to roll a 16 or less. A 17, 18, 19, or 20 will miss. 16 or less will hit me, but they're trying to roll as high as they can. If they roll like a 15, it's going to be really hard to win. They roll a 15 and I roll like a 10, 5, and a 2. Well, all of my shots hit, but they're negated by the higher roll for my opponent, and I take a hit. I've got to take an armor save, which we're about to talk about. But right now, I want to talk about how critical hits work. So, let's say I roll a 2, and I roll an 11, which is the exact number that I needed, so it's a critical hit, and I roll an 18. My opponent, on the other hand, rolls a 13. So, let's analyze and understand what has happened here. This number here is a critical hit because it matches the number up here that we needed. The 2 is a hit. The 18's a miss. Our opponent has rolled a 13. So our opponent doesn't have to worry about the 18. We can cross that out. Doesn't really matter. And the opponent's rolled a 13, which is higher than the 2, so we can cross that out, which doesn't really matter. But why doesn't the 13 cancel out the 11? It's higher. The reason it doesn't is because when you roll a critical hit, which is exactly the number you needed, it completely cancels out anything your opponent rolled on this side and automatically causes them to, take armor saves. All right. So the other thing that a critical causes is instead of just taking one armor save, which we're about to talk about, you take 2 saves instead. So that's the main difference there. If we'd rolled a 10 instead and the opponent had rolled a 17, well, that means that they just take 1 single armor save because one of our hits managed to get through, so to speak. So that's how a critical hit works. If you and your opponent both roll a crit, so if this had been a 16 instead, and we've got an 11 here, then nothing actually happens. You've wasted your order. I've spent the short skill, my opponent declares a shot, I declare a shot, we get out our dice, I roll a 2, and an 11, and an 18, my opponent rolls a flat 16, nothing ends up happening, because we've both rolled a critical hit, and you can't ever take damage when you've rolled a crit, unless of course they're using some other kind of weird attack, which we're not really talking about in the scope of this video. But in a face-to-face roll, you really want to try and roll that exact number, because not only do you win the encounter and do you prevent any damage befalling you, it means your opponent takes not just the hit that gets through, but an additional armor save. So I really want to make sure that that's understood before we now talk about how saves are worked out. Finally, we can talk about the step where a model actually takes damage and how you'd resolve that. So we now have become experts on how to resolve the shootout where we work out which model is going to need to take some damage penalties and resolve all of that, and we know the mods. Let's just talk about this situation where the model in the top right, that's Parvati, the one with the purple wings and blue sword, is shooting at Major Luna, and Parvati is looking really good with her submachine guns, and we roll the dice, and Major Luna is called upon to finally take a hit. Possibly Parvati has rolled a critical hit. Remember, if you roll a hit normally, because let's say Major Luna misses her shots, so one of the dice rolls from Parvati is a hit, because it's say like a 1 or a 2, and that she also gets, I don't know, a 12 or a 9 or whatever she needs to hit, exactly with a critical hit, then Major Luna would take another 2 armor saves. But how do you resolve them? Well, it's a little bit like what happened when we looked up the burst value of the gun. So the gun has a profile where you work out how many times it can shoot, how many dice it gets to roll in the active turn. In Parvati's case, by the way, for people who are curious, she gets 3 dice for a submachine gun, and then another one because she has the +1 burst rule on her profile. That's a more of an advanced kind of thing, so don't worry about it too much. So she'd roll all of these. We know that you get +3 range for a submachine gun, and Major Luna is very close. She's behind cover though, there's a barrier here, so that comes back down to Parvati's ballistic skill of 12. So it's +3 for range, -3 for cover, that's a 12, but then we check Major Luna, and she has this Mimetism -3 ability, which we saw Uma had earlier in the tutorial, so Parvati needs 9s, and we roll all of the dice, and we see what they come up as. And here's a great example, because we've rolled a 9 specifically here, that's a crit. I've accidentally bumped that, so we'll try another example. And there's a 2 and 11, so that's a 1 hit, that's 1 save that she would need to make. Another example here, if I roll the dice correctly, 4 and an 8, and there's a 9. And we're just going to imagine that Major Luna shoots back and just misses. She rolls like a 19. So in this case, a 4, that's 1 hit, 8, that's another hit, 9, that's a 3rd hit, but that's a critical hit. So that will add on another armor save, so Major Luna needs to make 4 saves. And to determine what dice roll she needs, we need to know the damage value of Parvati's gun, which we can look up on the profile, just as we did before, and find that whatever you need to roll in the D20 here needs to now beat the damage of the submachine gun. And I'll just tell you right now that that damage is 13. But there are some modifiers that affect how likely it is you are to pass these rolls. For starters, you can look at her armor. She has an armor value of 1. So whatever you roll, you can add to the dice roll. So if you need to beat a 13, you would ordinarily need to roll a 14. So any roll of a 14 would pass, but if you're getting +1 to whatever you roll because of the armor, well then a 13 would pass, wouldn't it? Because 13 + 1 is 14. 14 is higher than a 13, and there you go, you're golden. But thirdly, she is behind armor over here. Sorry, behind cover over here with cover grants armor. So in fact, the total armor bonus for Major Luna is 4 because she gets +1 naturally for her little, skimpy vest which she's wearing apparently, or her cloak. That must be it. It must be the cloak. And then the barrier here. So getting +4. If you need to roll, this is for your algebra friends. If you need to roll a dice number, and you're adding 4 to it, and it needs to beat a 13, what would you need? It would be surely a 10 or greater, because 10 plus 4 is 14, 14 is higher than a 13, and then obviously any dice roll above that is going to pass as well, so a 10 or 11, 12, and so on is going to pass. So she's been called on to take all of these hits. We're going to roll the dice and have a look. So, the 2, that fails, she takes a point of damage. 11 passes, 13 passes, 17 passes. That's a really good roll, by the way. But, unfortunately, that 1 wound means that we now check the wounds value for Major Luna and find that she has a wounds value of 1. That means that she loses a wound and goes down to 0 wounds, and that means, unfortunately, she's unconscious. She gets a little marker next to her to say that she is basically crippled. Let's take another look. If we'd passed all of them, by the way, nothing happens and she lives, which is great. So in this case, a 1 and a 2, that deals some additional damage here, and she takes 2 wounds, and we just completely remove her from the table and say goodbye to her completely. Alright, I know that experienced players are going to say, oh, there's some special rules called shock, and a weapon of this kind automatically removes her. And look, we're trying to keep it simple here, guys. Trying to keep it really simple. Let's think about an example where she passes all 4 of the saves. What you're called on to do then is make what's called a guts check. I don't want to go into this too much. I don't want to make it too complicated, but we then go and look at her willpower, which we talked about earlier, which is 14. And she must roll equal to or less than her willpower if she wants to stay there. Otherwise, she must try and duck in for cover and run away, screaming and crying and fearing for her life against this assault by Parvati's SMGs. You're also allowed to voluntarily fail the guts roll and try and dive for cover, and that's in fact what most players actually do. And rather than spend a lot of time explaining how guts rolls work, because honestly they're not that big a deal, I'm going to go into the next section where we talk about how prone status works, which is a super important concept in this game.
Down, get 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 down,
get down! Okay, so when you take damage, what happens is you are called on to take a guts check, but you can actually choose to fail your guts check if you want to. And one way in which you can fail your guts check is to try and get into cover by coming back behind a wall where your opponent can't see you. But another way to do it is by going prone, which is where you put this little marker nearby to your model, and what this means is that its silhouette changes, and this is an extremely important concept in the game and one that you will want to understand. As we learned earlier, these models take up this much space in the battlefield, and that's how you determine their line of sight. But when a model is prone, meaning that it has this marker next to it, it only counts in terms of size, in terms of physical volume, it only counts as this little base thing that the actual miniature is sitting on. So this little coin-shaped disc object, which is very, very short, is really the only thing that produces volume in the world and actually determines line of sight. So if we look at this example again, we've got our veteran Kazakh over here. We're asking the question, can this green cylinder see, not this, not talking about that, not talking about the head up here, can this green silhouette see this little blue strip down the bottom and the corresponding black strip at the back? By the way, I didn't really talk to you guys about line of sight and so forth. The model can only see the front arc where the blue's facing. We can cover that another time. But the point is here that when it goes prone, this green model here just can't see the enemy at all. But if we take the prone marker away, then obviously it goes back to being a silhouette too, and that changes. And this is a extremely important concept in the game. When you're collecting your little markers and tokens for your real life games, I would suggest collecting as many of these prone markers as you possibly can, because you're going to want to spread them out and put them on just about all of your models when you're deploying, because it's such a valuable thing to be able to stop your opponent from being able to move around and see where your enemies are and actually engage them in firefights with their big machine guns that have lots of extra dice in their active turn, and they can put you in the range bands that they need to get the high numbers and just murder you that way. So people that actually have the cardboard cutout prone markers in their box sets and stuff, if it has a blank, white bit of cardboard on the back of it, you can easily just get out a pen and write prone on the back of them if you don't have enough markers. But trust me, you're going to want lots and lots and lots of these. The other reason I want to talk about prone right now is because you can actually deploy the model prone when you first set them down on the tabletop. But you can also go prone when you are moving around the table, and let's talk about how that might work. So, as we know, you spend a regular order and you use a short skill and you can move, and you can go your full allocation of 4 inches if you want to. So we end up somewhere over here. At any point at the start of declaring the short skill, we could have done it then, for example, or we could do it now for the next short skill, you can make your model go prone. And when it's prone, it's only counting as that small, coin-shaped disc low to the ground, right? So you're just crawling along the ground. But when you're moving while prone, you only go half speed. So if your movement speed is 4, you'll go 2 inches. If your movement speed is 6 with a 2 on the end, from what we talked about earlier, you'll go 3 with the first short skill and 1 with the second. So, for example, let's say it's the beginning of everything here, and I'm spending a regular order on this person, flipped over the green thing. I decide to go prone at the start. I'm going to move 2 inches, and that's as far as I go. I ask my opponent if he's got any, or she's got any AROs, if they can see me. They do not. So I keep going. I'm going to stay prone. I'm going to continue another 2 inches, right? And that's the end of the order. I'll have to spend a new order if I want to continue. So another way I can do it is I can move 4 inches and then go prone and then move 2 inches. Or I could start crawling and I could move 2 inches and then take away the prone marker and then stand up and go 4. This could be used to sort of duck in and out of and behind boxes and crates and bits of terrain. So do look into this yourself. Another very common sort of situation is where people start their model behind the barrier, possibly in their deployment zone. So let's say he's all the way over here, and we're looking to shoot somebody way off the distance, and we've started the game with this marker next to him. So really, he can't see that area over there because this green thing's blocking him. But he wants to be able to. So I spend my normal order on him, declare that I'm removing the prone state. He's now standing up because the silhouette's like that. And my opponent can now declare AROs, because if at any point during that movement my opponent was able to see me, they can do that. And standing up by removing the prone marker counts as part of my movement, even if I didn't go anywhere. So if I have the prone marker, I remove it, I choose to move 0 inches, I'm still standing up because I'm going from basically being a little disc here to going to being this silhouette, and really want you guys to understand that. That's how it always works. By the way, when you go unconscious because you took a point of damage, you lose 1 wound like we just learned about, you always go prone when you drop to the ground as an unconscious model. So you're standing up, you get hit, you scream in pain, you fall to the floor, and you can't be shot at anymore because technically you're prone while you have that red unconscious marker next to you. Similarly, if a doctor comes over here and revives you and injects you with some helpful medical fluids or whatever they do, you remove the prone marker because you're standing back up again automatically and your model springs back to life and suddenly you can be seen again. That's a bit more of a complicated situation which we won't cover this time around, but do have a careful read of the prone rules and do make sure that you understand them when you're learning how to play, because they will aid you greatly. And in terms of winning, in terms of coming up with good strategies and tactics and getting the most out of your troops, you'll definitely need to be getting down. Hey guys, I'm really grateful that you managed to make it all the way through this tutorial to this point. I have basically finished teaching you how to play Infinity the game. You know so many of the core fundamental rules that when you pick up the rulebook and look at the wiki and generally explore the game, everything else is going to be quite easy to attach to what you already know. You can refer back to the basics that you've learnt. There's so much that I haven't covered, obviously. I haven't talked about how a lot of the special rules and abilities work. I haven't really even gone into normal roles, which is where you're attacking a model and they're not attacking you back, and there's a simply a role that's not contested by the enemy. I haven't really talked about the various different kinds of guns or hacking. It's not really needed. I mean, we can talk about templates and so forth. There's just so much there for you to learn on your own, but you don't need to do that prior to playing the game. You can ask somebody at this point, do you want to run through a really basic game with me, and when we encounter a situation that I'm unfamiliar with, let's just look at the rulebook, and you will be fine, you will enjoy yourself. We've also gone through a bunch of rules which have allowed you to sort of see how a tactical difference is made. I'll show you one last example here where we've got this massive tag, this big cutter, this robot. We spend an order on him. He moves out. He comes over to here. We see a guy in the distance who isn't even facing the right direction. He can't actually see anything unless it's in the front arc of the 180-degree portion of his base where he's got that little orange strip. So he can't even shoot back at us. The cutter measures its range with its HMG and finds that it's beyond 16 inches, so he gets +3 to hit. This massive battle tag here has a whopping ballistic skill of 15, so we need 4 dice to hit. With 18s required, because 15 plus 3 with the range is 18. There's no negative modifiers, so very easy to get lots of hits. Then of course the damage is a whopping 15, because that's what HMGs do, plus another one for the tag, getting an extra point of bonus damage. So our opponent here is going to be in a world of trouble, and that's the fun of Infinity, is finding situations where you get a massive advantage and just really bashing your opponent to death with the decisiveness and the brutality of the units in this game, and the tricks you can do to get really cool advantages, and just the tactile, strategic nature of the positioning in the terrain and how everything is just relevant to your position. It's just great fun, guys. So please give this game a go, and thanks for getting so far into the tutorial. About time to wrap things up at this point. We are now at the end of the How to Play Infinity tutorial. Thank you so much for watching this. Again, apologies that the video is so long to get through. I really just wanted to be as thorough as I could in explaining some of the concepts to people who are new, because sometimes the barrier to learning is just that little intimidation factor where things seem a little bit too difficult, and I wanted to really show you that it's not. Lastly, I'd love you to just check the links in the video description of this YouTube video, because there are some ways where you can expand your knowledge and find out more about what to do next if you're interested in playing this game. The first link, of course, is to the Infinity Army app, where you can look at all of the rules in your own time about the faction that interests you the most. What I want to say about this app, which of course you can get on your phone or on the website, is that when you're looking through the rules, you may think, wow, I just watched VaulSC's video and there was that moment where the big tag at the end, had ballistic skill 15 and a really big powerful gun, and that looks cool. And then you go and buy yourself one, and you're reading the rules and you're thinking, wow, hidden deployment, what does that do? Tactical awareness, what does that do? And you click on the link, and it will open a page to their wiki where it will actually explain how that works, and you see, oh, it allows you to do this, and you click on another link and it'll take you a different part of the wiki and it'll explain all of this, and you'll realize, wow, that model can be invisible and it's actually not deployed on the table until you want to spring your trap, and it suddenly appears and just blows somebody up, and you think, isn't that really powerful? Yes, my friend, yes, it's extremely powerful. And that's the kind of moment of learning that will allow you to enjoy this game more and more as you're sort of looking forward with excitement to putting your model on the table after painting it. So be aware of the wiki. It's very easy to get through just by linking through from Army Builder. Now, of course, if you want to be a perfectionist and read the exact rules and look up all of the actual specific wording of how to actually play this game, of course, you would go to the next link here, which is to the Infinity the Game resources section, where you can download the N4 rules and all of that good stuff. Just really straightforward here, big PDF. It'll take you much longer to read this PDF than it will to have watched this video, but of course you want to refer to it when you want to know exactly what using this particular close combat weapon will do and how that works, blah, 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 blah. My YouTube channel, if you guys are new to it, if this is the first VaulSC video that you're ever watching, this video you've just watched is replacing the one I did in 2019, which was viewed by 20,000 people, and really explained the game for N3 before the edition was updated. This video we're watching at the moment is for N4, but there are other tutorials as well. For example, if you want to learn how to play on Tabletop Simulator, which is the one that I've just been demonstrating, or if you want to learn how to turn your miniatures using a photogrammetry project from real life into the models I've just been playing around with online. If you don't want to do that, but you want to use the products that we've created for your own games online on TTS, there's a tutorial for how to actually use them in the mod, in the Steam Workshop mod. And of course, there are lots of bat reps where you can see me explaining, how the game's played, plus some funny skits and comedy videos, which I really enjoy doing as well. So there you go, guys. I'm VaulSC. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I really hope you have fun with Infinity the game. And for now, I'm going to go take a rest because this has been a long video, but... I forgot one thing. There's one last thing. Almost forgot. Why don't you go ahead and join my Discord? Because there's a whole bunch of people hanging out here where we organize games, we have events, we show off new things that we've come up with the 3D models generation, and we chat in text and in voice, and if you just want to be a lurker and watch us play, for example, there are live streams. Come on, you'd enjoy it. If you're on Discord, just click the invite and you're welcome to hang with us. But for now, I'm signing off. Have a good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Catch you next time.